We're going to stop the radical left.
He's potentially losing a large block of Americans.
The president takes no responsibility.
Who could he put on the ticket that could energize and turn out the base?
We're going to build a future of safety and opportunity.
He seems to enjoy making them angry.
The job is all about him, never about you.
It's very much a tale of two Americas, two very, very different experiences.
At the top of everyone's mind in November is going to be coronavirus and the economy. But because of the killing of George Floyd, because of the protests that followed that, and because of ongoing concerns about police brutality, race is going to play a very important role in this election.
Race has continuously been a cleavage in American politics, and it has played a role in American elections historically. It's something that both Democrats and Republicans have used to their electoral advantage in previous years.
It's definitely been a fault line in contemporary politics since the 1960s, when civil rights triggered a reorientation of racial voting patterns, and we found most minorities and people of color moving into the Democratic Party, and most whites that sort of harbored white racial attitudes moving into the Republican Party.
Race is always important in elections in the United States. That's because approximately 13% of the population is Black, 17% is Hispanic. Their turnout is key. So independent of race as an issue, race itself is super important in American elections.
In 2016, issues about race were also very important. It's just in 2016, it was much more focused on Hispanic Americans and on the idea of sort of keeping immigrants out of the country. That was central to Donald Trump's pitch then. Whereas this year, it's much more about Black Americans and the systemic racial inequalities that they've suffered versus sort of the idea that society should be structured in a certain way.
In 2008 and 2012, the discussion of race was about having an African-American man run for the presidency and win for the first time ever. 2016 seemed to be much more about Trump's overtly racial rhetoric at times. But this time round, there are three big areas that we can see race already playing a part in the election campaign. First is in support for the Black Lives Matter movement. The second big area is Trump's positioning on this issue. He's gone very hard on law and order and the silent majority, quote unquote. And I think the third is Joe Biden's choice of vice president. He has picked Kamala Harris. She is the first woman of colour ever to be on a presidential ticket for a major political party. And there is this big question of, can the Democrats get African-American voters back out in the kind of numbers that they did in 2008 and 2012?
It looks like America at this point in time is having sort of a new racial awakening. You know, these are issues that have been here, but it does seem a little different than previous political moments. We'll see if this actually bears out. But what we're seeing is that there's a greater support for Black Lives Matter among white Americans than we had seen previously.
I think there's been an upswell in support for Black Lives Matter, especially on the left. On the other hand, it's very possible that there's a less an underreported backlash to the racialization of everything. The backlash vote is more likely to go either to Trump or to turn people who would have voted for a Biden-Harris ticket into non-voters. And the pro-Black Lives Matter vote is certainly going to go to Biden and Harris.
Really, I think is going to become a question as we move forward over the next 3 months towards the election is, does the focus really stay on that notion of fairness and justice, which is territory where Joe Biden will be strong, or does Trump successfully pull the argument over to sort of the law and order frame, which is territory where Republicans are generally stronger?
Initially, there was almost unanimous outrage at the death of George Floyd and a very large amount of support for police reform, including among conservatives. However, because of the protests and because of the increasingly radical language of Black Lives Matter, Many moderate and conservative voters have drifted back to Donald Trump, who is now putting this out as a simple issue of law and order.
I am your president of law and order and an ally of all peaceful protesters.
Lots of presidents have run on law and order, and in times of chaos, it usually works because when push comes to shove, people want law and order more than they want chaos. And in the wake of the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis and the riots that ensued, it was disturbingly rare to see a Democrat condemn the violence full stop.
The Trump campaign are very supportive of police as an entity, and Trump has deployed some of this rhetoric a little clumsily. So he tweeted about suburban housewives who said, listen, vote for me and suburban housewives, you're going to be safe. You're not going to have these low-income households moving into your suburbs. Now, he didn't mention race explicitly at all in that, but a lot of Democrat critics said he is not so quietly hinting at the idea that white women will be more at risk from crime if they voted for Joe Biden.
In the past, Democrat tickets went for balance in terms of ideology. You would put a liberal candidate with a more moderate candidate. Nowadays, that balance is representational. Joe Biden is an old white man. Therefore, he wanted a younger woman of color to provide some balance to the ticket. This, it is hoped, will excite the rainbow coalition of ethnic minorities that traditionally support Democrats to come to the polls. It also creates a striking contrast with Donald Trump and Mike Pence, two relatively old, very white candidates.
Senator Kamala Harris, she's a powerful voice for this nation. Her story is the American story.
Kamala Harris, in terms of American feel-good politics, is able to symbolize both a historical moment by being the first African-American woman and first South Asian woman to be this close to the Oval Office on the presidential ticket. But beyond that, she's also a former state attorney general and prosecutor, and I think was able to help shore up Biden against any sort of charges of being too liberal on matters of race.
We must elect a president who will bring something different, something better.
In a way, she didn't appeal to the far left because she was a career prosecutor with a history of embodying the very kind of criminal justice abuses that people on the left see themselves as against. There's also the fact that she's a strong Black woman. And that's a lot of what people care about is just image. Many people don't actually care about substance. So they don't care what she did when she was a DA or Attorney General of California. They care that she's a Black woman who's proud to be a Black woman, went to a historically Black university, and can get up there on a debate stage and command a presence.
For me, the issue of race will be about turnout. The relationship of the police with the African American or Black community is super important. But more importantly is what's the effect on people going out and voting?
Race relations are perceived to be at an all-time low, and Donald Trump is viewed as weak on that issue. He's not a uniter. It is against all of his instincts to even try to unite the country on this issue. But it's also unclear if that will actually hurt him because the people that agree with the statement I just made probably weren't going to vote for him anyway.
The Democrats and the Republicans are both chasing the middle ground voter, but interestingly, they both have a different idea of who that kind of person is and what they think. For Donald Trump, the middle ground voter is a little more working class and is all in favor of law and order. They want to see peace restored to the neighborhood. For Joe Biden, on the other hand, the middle ground voter is probably a little more educated, a little more middle class, and what they want is a reckoning with America's deep-seated economic and racial problems. The truth is probably somewhere in between, that there is no traditional American middle ground voter in the way there used to be because American society has become so incredibly fractured. What we're going to see in November is a competition between two demographic bases and two very different understandings of what America is about and what it should be.